I want to thank my uncle-in-law, Mr. Lynn Shaw, and my aunt-in-law, Miss Mary Ann Shaw, for inviting me here. And I want to thank you for being here. I brought something. This is some sort of vase. I never thought it was particularly pretty vase. It even has a crack in it. But I'm sure it has quite a story to tell if I could only understand its language and what it's saying to me. And I find that this is so with people. We are all such walking history books that if only they were written in a language that others could fully read, then a picture of our parents wouldn't be just a picture of two people that we showed to somebody. And a house that is our home wouldn't be just a house to company we have over. And some sort of vase wouldn't be some sort of vase, but it would come with a story and a history that we would be able to read. But I found that much in life is particular to the time and place and to the shoes of the person that's going through it. So much so that as much as we try to share something of ourselves with another person, in the end, all that comes across is something that's akin to sweeping at the edges of what we know is a big picture. That's funny. And even if that's so, that after all we do to try to share something of ourselves with somebody else, that it's just sweeping at the edges, I think that it's a worthy thing to try, and I think we ought to do it. And so I'm here to talk about my water tank. I am assuming that most of you know about my outdoor decoration on the other side of town called the Mindfield, and I have a water tank there. I was told that my grandmother-in-law, Mrs. Helen Whitehurst, reportedly once said about my water tank that, oh, it's just a water tank. Anybody could put it up. Maybe so. She may be right. 17 years ago, my dad, Reverend Charles Tripp, died. A year before he died, he'd gotten out of hospital for yet another time of being in the hospital. And while neither he nor I felt our best, we thought we both needed a vacation. And I said, well, I know this outdoor artwork up in Wisconsin that I'm going to go and see sometime in my lifetime, so why don't we go now? And that's what we did. We got up early one morning and we went north. In Union City, we had breakfast at McDonald's. Plain old ordinary McDonald's. But oh, you should have been there. Soon we were on the road again and we crossed into Kentucky. And about 30 miles later, we would cross the Mississippi River into southern Illinois. But about halfway before we got there, we went through a small town. And on the other side of the town, at the city limits, on the side of the road, there was this, what looked like to be once a factory, one-story brick building, big windows. but several of the window panes were broken out and grass and brush was growing up. In between it and the road was this water tank that was rusty and just standing there. I slowed down as we drove by it and pointed it out to my dad. And several days later, when we came back from Wisconsin, I pulled into the driveway, and while he sat in the car, I went to investigate this water tank. It was late summer, and I had my shorts on and sandals, and there was weeds and brush, but that wasn't going to stop me. And I walked right up to the tank, and it was talking to me, and I could understand its language. And it was saying, "Billy, I'm standing here. This was once a busy place. People were working in that factory day and night, and I held water for them, but now it's abandoned, and I'm just standing here with nothing, and soon it and I are going to be torn down and no more. Why don't you come up here and look at me and think about taking me down and putting me up in your Mindfield and letting me hang around for a little longer? I'm such a pretty thing." 2 days after that, and back home, I came down with my worst bout of poison something or another. I don't know if it was ivy or oak or sumac that I'm sure I got from walking through those weeds to go up there. But I got over it, and I soon researched who owned the water tank. And I found out that the factory had gone out of business owing a bank in Paducah some money, and the bank owned the first rights of what was said about the property. So I went up there and talked to the bank and to the man whose name was Bill Hall. He was about my age, and he was in charge of handling these properties. And just by coincidence or luck or something, he happened to live in this small town where this water tank and factory were. And I told him about my Mindfield and that I'd like to take it down and put it up there. And I told him that I'm sure he knew how expensive it would be, and that I would pay him $1,000 for it. But I'd like to get it for $1,000, but I'll pay him as high as $2,000. And quite naturally, I thought, being a banker, he would just take the most money and run, or go, or sell it to me. He said, "I'll split the difference with you and sell it to you for $1,500. So we were about to close the deal, and he said, "Well, let me run this by my lawyers just to make sure everything's okay, and I'll give you a call." I didn't have a phone back then, so I gave him my dad's phone number. He had an answering machine. And a couple of weeks later, I got a message from him to phone him back, and I phoned him, and he said, well, his lawyers had said that the water tank was considered part of the real estate, and that in order to sell the water tank, he would have to foreclose on the whole property. So it didn't look like he was going to be able to sell me the tank, but he said he would continue to work on it. And so a couple of months after that, I called him back, and he said, well, somebody had been interested in buying the property for the factory, but not the water tank, and if they bought the property, I could get the water tank. And I said, well, that would be good. And I gave him my dad's number again and said, call us if something comes up. My dad was getting sicker and weaker, and I would rolling around the rooms in the house in a wheelchair, and we would stop by his phone and answering machine, and we'd press the button, and it'd always say, seems like, you have no new messages. You know, we would just kind of play it up, you know, we have no new messages. And after a while, I had the feeling that it was developing into something more for him. Not only was it we have no new messages about the water tank. But he was wanting another type of message. He was nearing the end of his life. And it just seemed to me that he was wanting a message, something like, well done, my good and faithful servant. Here are the keys to heaven. But it didn't come. And soon after that, he entered the hospital for the last time. About 3 weeks after that, I got a message. And it was Bill Hall. And he said, against his lawyer's advice, he was going to sell me the tank. But there was one condition. He couldn't write me a bill of sale. And I said, done deal, fine. So I had the tank, but I had to take it down. But in the meantime, it was September when my dad died. And if I was going to take the tank down, I was going to have to work on it pretty soon and get it down before winter, or else I'd have to wait till next spring. But I mean, how can you do that when your dad just died? But for me, when my dad died, I was so emotionally empty. I was kind of emotionally bankrupt from months of caring with him, that I didn't know how I was going to deal with my dad's death. I just wasn't able. I mean, physically I was okay, but emotionally I just wasn't there. But I'd heard that people had postponed coming to terms with the death of a loved one, and that they had gotten through it. So I said, that's what I'll do. I'll just do it another time. And in the meantime, I'll take this water tank down. It'll give me something to do. So that's what I did. The day after he died, I was in Kentucky beginning to take it down, beginning first steps to take it down. And it took me 6 weeks to take down. And 2.5 years later, 3 things in my life came together. I've been a person who off and on have kept a journal, and a few years before my dad died, I'd stopped keeping a journal. And 2.5 years after he died, I was kind of ready to start keeping a journal again. And I was kind of ready to come to terms with my dad dying, and I was ready to put up the water tank. And I said, well, that's what I'll do. I'll use this journal to kind of talk to myself and come to terms with my dad dying. And I'll put up this water tank for the story to kind of go with it, but also for the time frame. That whenever I get done putting up the water tank, that's all I'm going to do with this coming to terms with my dad. I didn't want to grieve forever. And it took me 2.5 years to put up the water tank. And everything worked out. At the end of 2.5 years, I had my water tank up. I'd come to terms with my dad's death. And I had a 2,000-page journal. The first 300 pages is this book. I have 4 books out, and they're all called the Mindfield Years. And this is volume 4, and I call it My Year of Dina. Dina is the name of the water tank. And I thought I could get it up in a year, so that's where that came from. And I have a subtitle, Goodbye to Dad. And then in brackets it says, and to Mom. My mom died when I was in my mid-20s, and I was just of the type that I wasn't mature enough to really know her. And so I really didn't miss her when she died. But when I got ready to say goodbye to Dad, it was I was so glad. that she showed up, and I could say goodbye to her too. And I want to read you the first. For 2.5 years, practically every day, I wrote something. And this is the first day. I want to read the first day I wrote. It's only 2 pages. And then I have something brief to say after that, and I'll be done. I'm going to need my glasses. Okay, this is the first day. Dear Dad, I've cleaned my shop today. It's been one of those days for such. You know, the winter about done, spring all but here. Thoughts turn to the future, to a warm season of good working, of sweat, of being glad one is alive. You know, I'm sure you do. But of course, how could I really? I mean, I know winter is about over and that spring is but ready, and that sure I look forward to a summer stretch of good work. Yes indeed, sure. But not sure, and indeed certain, is that I know now nothing about you, is that I know still all I ever did, but for what is changed and lost to memory, and even more, I mean, is what I've learned since you died. Since you died, the world has changed but little. Only my path, small and minuscule, has gone differently, because you went, normal as could be, the way life goes to get out. It doesn't take much to stop everything about me. Only that part of me which continually grieves for not understanding why you had to suffer so. I have been at suicide's doorstep 3 times in my life. The first time was so long ago, it is hard to remember how old I exactly was. What I do remember is that I was not in high school, that I was 9, 10, 11 years old, and that I was definitely beside the home I most associate with that which made me most what today I am. And as childhood development plays its part in forever, then from that place which also, I guess, I am and will forever be too, like you, until death, and what does change, even when we leave it, will be that which does not, and what stays the same, even after part of it is gone. Things happen. I guess I ought to be glad. In many ways, the examples which parents impress upon progeny become what mortality is certainly and practically probably all about. Dear Dad, I have 3 cranes now instead of 1. I remember how you used to love to tell, how you loved to hear the raucous, unmuffled yell of my first crane's blubbering cry to the world, loud, loud, loud exhaust of what it meant to you to be able to do both. To inhale and to breathe out was you. My second and third cranes I bought while you were in the hospital the last time. The 30-ton truck crane, P&H model, with 4 axles, was delivered in July, and I brought its 2-book manual to your room to help me pass the time. I doubt you knew, or that you could register the thought of Bill Hall finally calling and of me getting Dina. Did you? I whispered to you that he had and that I had. And while you nodded and smiled, I don't know what you knew, like I would have, say, a year earlier. Months earlier, you and I would maneuver around the rooms in your home, You almost couldn't stand unassisted. Indeed, you couldn't without a fair chance of you still doing so minutes later. The last good times you could were while I cleaned you by the sink and dried you with a simple towel. Hurry up, it's cold, you said. Remember? Again in the hospital, you once got out of bed to rest, covered with a bed sheet and a chair for a very short time. After that, technically, you never did again. 17 years ago, when I was taking down my water tank, I would occasionally walk around inside the nearby factory and try to understand what was once going on there. I'm sure once I walked around drinking from a bottle of beer to try to help me hear the voices and to know the language of what was going through there. It was mostly an empty place. There were workstations here and there. And then I decided to walk around the outside of the building. This factory, the name of this factory was Dina Lamp Products. It was actually written on my water tank. Dina was the daughter of the owner of the factory. And what they did there, they dug clay from near the banks of the Mississippi River, which was about 15 miles away, and they brought it to this plant, and they formed it into vases for lamps. And as I was walking around, I saw this pile of shattered and broken ceramic parts. And I said, you know, this must be the lamps, the body of the lamps. I started looking through it for a good part to find, and I thought, well, maybe I'll find a whole one. And I dug and dug, and this was the one I found, the only whole one I could find. And that's what they did there. And even though, after all we do to share with others parts of ourselves and to listen to others share with us parts of them, and we just end up sweeping around the edges of the big picture. But it's a worthy thing to do, and I think we ought to do it. And you here are just walking history books. I hope you share and talk to your neighbors and be a part of the community. You are lamps of light. And do your part and involve yourself. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Billy, could you tell us a little bit about the process of taking the water tower down?
Well, I had hired somebody to haul my crane up there. It wasn't roadworthy, and my crane was fully capable of taking it down. And first I measured it and measured the parts and decided how I would cut it up if I were to take it down, and then figured out how much it weighed. I bought a geometry book, and it helped me to figure out the weights from shapes of thick metal that is so thick. And I decided my crane could handle it. So I took my crane up there, and I just started from the top. I hooked to a piece with my crane, and I would cut out that piece and then lift it and put it on the ground. And pretty much the ball came apart in pie-shaped pieces. Same way, I would just hook to a piece, and some of the bigger pieces I would cut it all, but just a little bit. You know, I was a little scared to be up there when it broke loose, you know. And then I'd get down and I'd swing it around and it'd break loose. And and then the stem, I just cut into sections and put down. And
What were you standing on when you were cutting?
well, on the top half, I was on on the top, on the polar cap of it, I was standing on it, the sections. But once I got that top lid off, I put a ladder inside and leaned it up against the interior and would cut out. And I planned so well that I only had one mishap. I mean, I took that whole thing down and only had one mishap. And I'd planned for it, but I didn't realize how far the wind could blow a spark. I was inside cutting out, and it blew a spark and caught some brush afire. And I got down there and I got it out, but I was worn out, you know.
How long did it take you to take that down?
It took about 6. I went up there and spent the night in my truck for about 3 days at a time, and came back and checked my car wash, and then would go back up there. It took about 6 weeks. It came down pretty quick, and I hauled it in about 12 loads. I cut it where it would just widen. I think my widest load was maybe 10 feet. But once I got to Union City, it was all, you know, it's a 4-lane pretty much, down to Dyersburg, and then I came to Bells. And I always came by. I see we have a former Tennessee state trooper here. I always came back after midnight when nobody was on the road. But I was so, you know, if I were to do that again, I would think, I'd have to give it a second thought, you know. But I am overly cautious. I mean, I really strapped it down. I had lights on it and yellow tape, you know. And one of the stem part was just like a big 8-foot pipe, and it had a flared end. And I had that flared end on the back of my truck. And I came into Dyersburg from Union City one time with that. And a highway patrolman was behind me. I didn't realize it till he passed me. I slowed down to turn off. I knew it just looked like a rocket on that old truck, you know. And but he didn't stop me. I turned and he went on, you know.
When you put it back together, did you weld it together? How'd you?
That's right. It was all in part. So pretty much I did the same. I had this book concerns mostly getting the foundation in the ground, the first 300 pages. And I hired Mr. David Coast in DC Construction to do the concrete. But I would hold a piece and get it in place, and then I would tie it down where I could let go of it with my crane and pick up the other piece. And this was near the bottom like a tent. It had 8 pieces. And I made guides on the piece before I put them up where they would slip into the next piece and be pretty close. And I would tack it. And then I just kind of stacked the stem, which was just a tube, and then put up the outside. I took pictures, and I kept my journal, and I hope to get out the rest of it. I'll tell you something else about this book. It starts out, one of its purposes, probably the main purpose, is goodbye to Dad and Mom. But during the last of it, I included my dad and mom's love letters. They got married in their mid-30s, and they're both college graduates. And so the letters were fairly literate, They were pretty well written and interesting. And I included them, and that way I could kind of, it helped me to pretend that they were around and talk to them. And I got done with the water tank, but I wasn't quite done with saying goodbye to Dad and with my story. I'd begun the letters, but I hadn't gotten to the last of them. So the last part of the book is, I'm done with the tank, but I'm trying to get through the letters and get them married, because they get married at the end of their letters. And in that process, I met my wife. So, and she shows up in it. And so the goodbye kind of turns into saying hello to what came after that. So it's kind of neat.
I just wondered, I read somewhere where people coming to Tennessee went to Opryland first, Graceland second, then to see the Mindfield third. Is that true?
I don't know. But you remind me, I want to read something I was going to show you. The first 20 pages, my brother Bob is moving to Florida. And that's what I'm helping him to move to Florida. And I get back, and if I can find it, I'm eating out at the Cream Castle, and it says, I now eat supper at the Cream Castle. C. Ray Dixon, a notable traveler of miles himself and his wife, who asked and did not know about Mob moving to Florida. So, and I think I've mentioned Mr. Curlin. If it's not in this book, it's one of my books about Curlin alignment being right there.
Are your books for sale, or is that just for your birthday?
Well, you can get them through Amazon, or you can go to Anthony's Barbershop that's in front of my Mindfield. Now, this book, I just got done with it, and I ordered some, and they'll be there next Friday. But the other two books one's an autobiographical novel. That's my first thick one. And then the volume 3 is the journal I started a year after I started my Mindfield. I don't know. I do this because I enjoy it, and it gives me meaning in life. But if the community can get some miles out of it for the good of the community, I'm all for that. And I really do enjoy having a sense of being a part of the community. Were you going to say something?
Yes, Mr. Billy, tell us how many people you had in your work crew.
Of what, building
Who helped you?
on the water tank, or? Well, Mr. Costin put the concrete in the ground, but I've done the rest by myself.
Yeah,
I mean,
that was what I wanted.
I took it down by myself.
How can one man do all of that?
I had a lot of time, and I wasn't married during any of it, and I don't have children. But
And the second comment.
it's not as hard as you would think.
A lot of people come here to see the Mindfield, but they complain that they don't have access.
Yeah.
They have to walk way around to look.
Yeah.
If you had an entrance where people could walk through the park, it would be.
Okay.
You may think about that in the future.
I don't mind that. No.
Okay.
And really, probably the only good way is to come behind the barber shop, and you kind of hug the motel. But the motel is dug a little drainage trench there. Maybe I could, and it doesn't work. I don't know. Maybe I could tell them I'd put gravel. I do like to connect stories to my piece. before I started this, I was working smaller pieces, and I had 2 series. My first one was stick men. I made stick men, which was real basic, simple, like a child would draw, just 2 arms and hands and a head. And then, see, I grew up where my brother lives, and you can see the town, Oakwood Cemetery in the back. And that probably had something to do with my next series, was a series of grave markers. And they weren't really that type of grave marker for the final death, but I like to think that with every little change we go through, we become a little bit different. If it's a little change, you're a little bit different. It's a big change, you're a big different. So during several of my big changes, I made markers. I call them grave markers. When I finished my first book, I made a marker that has the name of the book and the character's name, and a bench with the 3 characters sitting on it. And they have fishing poles, and at the end of the poles are letters, and they're fishing for words because the characters are 20 years old and they're trying to grow up. That's what they want to do. They want to be grown up, But like someone who talks about California who's never been to California, you end up mumbling a lot. I wasn't grown up, So they were fishing for words, to trying to be grown up. I have other stories. I have my dad. Go ahead.
What year you started on Mindfield?
I started in '89, yeah, and I have that down there somewhere, '89, and I was going to say it has developed into. I think it's neat that I had a series of grave markers, but now, after my dad died, I was advised to make a will and get a burial policy, so I did. And I got permission from the city to be cremated and buried there. So that's like my grave marker now. And I've put words down there. I have 2 silhouettes of myself. They're kind of stretched out like this. One is upright and the other is upside down. And there are words underneath each of them. And together they make up my epitaph, which would go on a grave. And if I can remember it, it starts out on the living side. It says, here I labor to live, knowingly. Here I labor to live, knowingly accepting, knowingly trading. Here I labor to live, knowingly trading my life for it lived, acceptingly trading my life for it lived, knowingly for death. So that's my epitaph. And I also have what I call my dad's grave marker down there. No, he's not buried there. I was working on it before he died. And it's the tallest thing down there. It's a real tall beam. And I took drawings of his hands before he died. And at the bottom of it, about eye level, I cut it out. And I'll tell you what goes with it. It's a little quiz. And it says, and. So now, Billy, begin your life without him. My dad, 2002. Now, why did I put 2 ands at the front? And, so now, Billy, begin. Because I was stuttering to begin. I was having a hard time, And I am. I have besides it being kind of a grave marker theme, to me it looks like at night a ship, a sailing ship. It's kind of long and narrow, so I have a ship theme. And last year I put up the cement silo that came from Mr. Hort Hayes' concrete place. And it's kind of like a storage place for the ship's fuel or the seed, that they're carrying.
The lighthouse.
Yeah, well, I think that kind of goes with the ship theme too, And one came from this county, at Sunny Hill, and the other came from Madison County, about a mile from Britton Lane Battlefield site, and the other came from Mindfield. And but I just think that I like for them to be pretty and kind of work design wise, but I kind of like to figure a story into it too. And when I got married, you know, like that was a big event, you know. And so I made a marker for her. You put poster board on the wall, and she stands before it with a floodlight, and it casts a shadow, and you trace the shadow out and then cut it out, and then you lay it on a piece of metal, cut that out, and you end up with a silhouette, you know. And she's kind of standing like this with one foot and one leg in the minefield, and then the 1 foot and one hand kind of the courthouse, you know, and underneath it, it says interpreter. So she's kind of like the interpreter for the minefield. But the N and the second E in interpreter, I turned around backwards, you know, because you really don't get the full story in a translation or an interpretation. And underneath it, underneath it says MF interpreter. And some people, I joke about MF, you know, because what you hear around here, but it's Mindfield interpreter. I kind of like to laugh, you know. It's fine. I'm sorry to keep y'all.
No, you're not keeping it. We want research and refreshments on that day.
I'm so glad to see y'all. Yeah, really glad you're still here.
Out of the broken shards of Tina, you found a whole piece.
I did.
And out of the broken,
Oh, yeah.
and out of the broken parts of your life.
Yeah, that's right.
At
Yeah.
that time, you have created a wholeness.
Yeah.
The metaphor was not missed.
Oh, good.
Did you say that we could order those books from Amazon?
You go to Amazon Books,
Ben's
and
always doing that.
or you can just go down to the barber shop,
And where is that?
right in front of the minefield.
Listen, if you hadn't
You
been there,
know,
it's the most
she-
fun place in the world.
It is kind of neat.
No, it's right next to the motel.
Now, where was the factory? Hickman?
Arlington.
Arlington.
You go,
Okay. that's
Clinton,
up-
you know,
okay,
Clinton.
That's up further north.
Well, it's halfway between Union City and Cairo on 51.
Okay. I was just curious.
But they've torn it down. The building.
I'm gonna tell you something. I was in Atlanta week before last, and I swear, I mean, I caught a glimpse of something out the corner of my eye, but it looked like someone's trying to copy your mouth.
Oh, really?
It was in a yard. I mean, I was at this farmer's market.
Let me skip out here and get my name.
And I was driving back to my cousin's, and of course I was in traffic. Out of the corner, you know, I suddenly caught this thing, and I thought, but it was low. It was low. It was not high. It was low. It could have been in a front yard, but it was just.
Was it decoration?
Out of the corner of my eye, I caught the glimpse of what could have been like the minefield. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's a mini minefield, except it would have been a mini, because it was low. It was like what I saw, you know, it was so quick and I couldn't go back. But it was like in the front yard, maybe of an old house. I don't know, because I went by it, you know, and I couldn't catch a full glimpse of it. But that was my impression. I was down like at a farmer's market, southeast of Buckhead, baby. And when I came back, you know, I set my GPS so that I didn't come back through Buckhead. I came back around the southern part, maybe, of Atlanta. I was just following my GPS. But I swear I thought, because it looked